October 15th, 1943. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Maternity ward, Allegheny General Hospital. Nurse Birdie Calloway stands in the third-floor corridor and watches Chief Physician Dr. Clement Ordway carry a bundle wrapped in a blue blanket out of room 17. This is the 8th case in 2 months. Birdie knows what happens next. Within the hour, the new mother will be told her infant died from a congenital heart defect. The body has already been sent to the funeral home, paperwork completed, condolences offered. Life goes on. Birdie is 24 years old. She's worked here 2.5 years, and in that time, she's learned to recognize the lie in Dr. Ordway's eyes. Tonight, she'll open her old composition book with the marbled black and white cover, the one she keeps in her dresser drawer under her stockings, and write, October 15th, room 17, boy, weight 7 pounds 8 ounces, mother, Estelle Kowalski, age 28, address, 1847 Brereton Street, apartment 4. Ordway removed child at 2:35 p.m., said consultation with head nurse Mildred Gannon required. Baby did not return. This will be the 43rd entry in 2 years. 43 infants who vanished in the corridors of this building, constructed back in 1928, when Pittsburgh still had more steel mills than churches. Birdie was born March 3, 1919, in a coal mining town called Vintondale, to Clyde Calloway, a mine foreman, and Ruth Calloway, a seamstress. Only child. Her father died in 1936 from black lung. Birdie was 17. After that, her mother withdrew into silence, barely speaking, just walking to her sewing jobs and back. Birdie finished nursing school in Pittsburgh in 1939, worked 4 years at a community clinic in Homewood, then, in May 1941, took a position in the maternity ward at Allegheny General. Salary, $38 a week. She rents a single room in a boarding house on Perrysville Avenue, 12 feet by 10, window facing an alley where cats fight all night. Her mother stayed in Vintondale. Birdie visits once a month, brings groceries and her weekly pay envelope. They hardly speak. Her mother seems frozen in that afternoon in 1936 when Clyde collapsed in the mine shaft and never got up. Dr. Clement Ordway arrived at the hospital in January 1941. He was 42 years old then. Tall, stooped, with thinning hair the color of wet sand and yellow fingers from Lucky Strikes. He'd graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1925, worked in Baltimore until 1938, then relocated to Pittsburgh citing family circumstances. That's how he explained it. Nobody asked for details. He had connections at the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Everyone knew that. Head nurse Mildred Gannon, a woman of 60 with a face like a dried apple and a voice like rusty hinges, treated Dr. Ordway with nervous deference. She never questioned his decisions. When he said, consultation, she nodded and retreated to her office. The first time Birdie noticed something wrong was November 23, 1941. The mother, Pauline Kester, 22 years old, first baby, delivery went fine. Boy, 8 pounds 6 ounces, cried immediately, pink, healthy. Dr. Ordway entered the delivery room 15 minutes after birth, looked at the infant and said, need head nurse Gannon's consultation. Possible heart defect. Birdie was surprised. No signs of any defect. An hour later, Pauline was told her baby died. Birdie tried asking Nurse Gannon what happened, but the head nurse cut her off. Not your concern, Calloway. Mind your station. Birdie said nothing, but that evening, lying on her narrow bed in the boarding house, she stared at the ceiling where brown water stains spread like maps. Something wasn't right. A healthy baby doesn't die in an hour without visible cause. Second case, December 14, 1941. Just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, when the whole country was reeling, when newspapers screamed about Japanese attacks and young men lined up at recruiting stations. A mother named Constance Hartwell, 19 years old, her husband already shipped to basic training at Fort Dix. Girl, 7 pounds 3 ounces, healthy lungs, good color. Dr. Ordway took the baby for consultation. An hour later, Constance was told her daughter had died from respiratory failure. Birdie helped clean the young mother afterward. Constance didn't cry, just stared at the wall with empty eyes and whispered, Quote 5. Third case, January 9th, 1942. A woman named Rita Gorman, 31, already had 3 children at home. This was supposed to be her last. Boy, 8 pounds even, strong cry. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 6, underscore, underscore. Dr. Ordway said, and carried him away. Rita never saw her son again. When they told her he'd died, she said, I felt him kick for 9 months. He was strong. He was healthy. But she signed the papers. They all signed the papers. 4th, January 28th, 1942. After the 4th, Birdie retrieved an old composition book and started recording. Date, room number, baby's sex, weight, mother's name, address, time Dr. Ordway removed the child. She didn't know why she did it. She just couldn't not do it. It felt like a compulsion, an obsessive need to document, to remember, to keep these lives from dissolving into the routine of hospital shifts. The cases continued through 1942, February, March, April. Every few weeks, another baby. Some months there were none. Other months, 3. Dr. Ordway seemed to have a pattern, though Birdie couldn't quite identify it. He never took babies from wealthy families, never from the wives of doctors or lawyers or executives. Always working-class women. Factory workers, shop clerks, seamstresses, cleaning ladies. Women who wouldn't make trouble. Women who'd believe what a doctor told them. By the time America's war effort hit full stride in summer 1942, with women flooding into the steel mills and munitions factories to replace men who'd gone overseas, Dr. Ordway had taken 23 babies. Birdie had recorded every single one. She kept the composition book hidden, wrapped in an old pillowcase, stuffed behind her winter coat in the boarding house closet. Sometimes she took it out late at night when the other boarders were asleep and read through the entries by the light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Names, dates, addresses, each one a story. Each one a mother somewhere in Pittsburgh who thought her baby was dead. Birdie tried talking to other nurses, carefully, obliquely. Quote 8. Quote, she asked Lorraine Buckley one day in the staff room. Lorraine, a plump woman of 40 with 2 teenage sons, shrugged. Quote 9. Quote, Birdie pressed. Quote 10. Lorraine cut her off. Quote 11. The conversation ended there. Birdie tried once more with Phyllis Drummond, a young nurse who'd started the same year as Birdie. They were folding linens in the supply closet when Birdie said, Phyllis, does it seem strange to you that so many healthy babies die right after Dr. Ordway takes them for consultation? Phyllis's hands stopped moving. She looked at Birdie with wide, frightened eyes. Quote 13. Quote, she whispered. Quote 14. Quote, Birdie understood. She stopped asking questions. The war dragged on through 1942 and into 1943. Birdie's boarding house emptied out as women moved to better jobs in defense plants or followed husbands to military bases. Food rationing intensified. Meat, butter, sugar, coffee, all controlled by stamps and ration books. Birdie spent her evenings darning stockings and listening to war news on the radio she shared with the landlady. The Eastern Front, North Africa, the Pacific. So many battles, so many dead. And here in Pittsburgh, in the 3rd floor maternity ward of Allegheny General, babies kept disappearing. By fall 1943, Birdie had 42 entries. 42 babies in 23 months, nearly 2 per month. All healthy. All died within an hour of Dr. Ordway taking them for consultation. Bodies never shown to parents. Paperwork processed instantly. Burials at Allegheny Cemetery, infants section, small mounds with wooden markers bearing only dates. Born and died the same day. Birdie didn't know what to do. Dr. Ordway was untouchable. Nurse Gannon feared him. The other physicians stayed silent, either didn't notice or pretended not to. Go to the police? With what? A composition book full of names and dates? They'd laugh at her. Or worse, she'd be fired for slandering the chief physician, maybe even arrested for making false accusations against a man with connections to the state health department. Birdie lived alone. Her mother in Vintondale wouldn't understand. She had no friends, just shift colleagues with whom she exchanged pleasantries about the weather and ration lines at the grocery. But on October 15, 1943, when Dr. Ordway carried out the 43rd baby, something broke inside Birdie. Maybe it was the mother, Estelle Kowalski. Maybe it was the accumulation of 2 years of watching and recording and saying nothing. Maybe it was the war, the sense that the whole world was fighting for something that mattered, and here she was, silent, complicit by inaction. When Birdie entered room 17 2 hours after delivery, Estelle lay with open eyes staring at the ceiling. Tears ran down her temples into her dark hair. She didn't sob or scream, just lay there crying silently, hands folded over her empty belly. Birdie sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Estelle squeezed her fingers so hard bruises formed. Quote 17, quote, she whispered. Quote 18, quote. Birdie nodded slowly. Quote 19, quote, she said. Quote 20, quote. Estelle turned her head and looked at her, really looked at her, searching Birdie's face. Why wouldn't they let me say goodbye? Even if he died, why couldn't I hold him once? Birdie didn't answer immediately. She sat there holding Estelle's cold hand, and inside her, a hard, icy knot of determination formed. She thought about the composition book. 43 entries, 43 mothers, 43 babies. How many more before someone stopped this? Mrs. Kowalski, Birdie said quietly, I need to tell you something, but not here, not now. When you're discharged, I'll come see you. Will you let me? Estelle stared at her. What do you mean? Will you let me visit you at home? It's important. Something flickered in Estelle's eyes. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. She whispered. The next day, October 16th, Birdie found Estelle's address in the medical chart and wrote it in her book. She decided to wait a week. New mothers typically got discharged on the 5th or 7th day if there were no complications. Estelle was discharged October 21st. That evening, Birdie took the streetcar to Brereton Street, the composition book wrapped in brown paper and tucked in her handbag. Number 1847 was a typical Pittsburgh row house, brick darkened by decades of steel mill smoke, with paint peeling from the wooden trim. Apartment 4 was on the 2nd floor. Birdie climbed stairs that smelled of cabbage and coal dust and knocked. Estelle answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. She'd aged in a week, face gaunt, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a hasty bun. You came, Estelle said. I said I would. Come in. The apartment was small, clean despite its poverty. One bedroom visible through an open door, a main room with a sofa that had seen better days, a table with 2 chairs, a radio on a shelf, windows facing the brick wall of the next building. It smelled of stale air and something sour, milk that had gone bad maybe. On the table sat a bottle, a stack of diapers, a tiny knitted cap. Things Estelle had prepared, things she'd never use. They sat at the table. Birdie took the composition book from her handbag, unwrapped the brown paper, and placed it between them. Quote 31, quote, she said. Quote 32, quote. Estelle froze, hands gripping the edge of the table. Quote 33, quote. Quote 34, quote. Estelle stared at the book, then at Birdie, then back at the book. Her face had gone white. Quote 35, quote 36. Birdie opened the composition book. Page after page of entries in neat handwriting. November 23, 1941. December 14, 1941. January 9, 1942. On and on. Names, dates, addresses, weights, times. A catalog of stolen children. Estelle read, her finger trailing down the pages. Her breathing became shallow. Quote 37. Quote, she whispered. Quote 38. Quote. Quote 39. Quote. Quote 40. Quote. Estelle looked up, and there was something fierce in her eyes now, something burning. Quote 41. Quote 42. Birdie said. Quote 43. Quote Estelle looked at the book again. Her finger stopped on an entry from June. Quote 44. Quote, she said slowly. Quote 45. Quote, Birdie nodded. Quote 46. Quote, they went to Frances Holbrook's apartment the next evening. Frances was a tired-looking woman of 35, cleaning woman at a grammar school, hands reddened from years of scrubbing floors. When Birdie and Estelle explained why they'd come, Frances collapsed into a chair and wept for 10 minutes straight. Then she wiped her eyes and said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 47, underscore, underscore. Throughout November 1943, the three women worked through Birdie's list. Not all the addresses were still valid. Some families had moved, following war work to other cities, or joining relatives after losing babies. Some women closed their doors when they heard the subject. 3 refused outright. 1, a woman named Clara Dietrich said through a cracked door, "Leave me alone. I've made my peace with it. I don't want to dig it all up again." Another, Nadine Polk, said, "Even if it's true, what good does knowing do? My baby's gone. Gone is gone." She shut the door before Birdie could respond. But 7 agreed. 7 women who'd given birth at Allegheny General in 1943, whose babies had been declared dead by Dr. Ordway, who'd never seen the bodies, who'd been told cremation or immediate burial was necessary for public health reasons. Frances Holbrook, 35, cleaning woman, delivered June 12, 1943, girl, 7 pounds 1 ounce. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 50, underscore, underscore. Violet Brennan, 23, clerk at Kaufman's department store. Delivered August 8, 1943. Boy, 7 pounds 15 ounces. Died from asphyxiation. Her husband was serving in Italy. Hazel Dorsey, 31, seamstress at a uniform factory. Delivered September 19, 1943. Girl, 6 pounds 13 ounces. Died from brain hemorrhage. Her husband had been killed at Anzio 2 months earlier. Dorothy Stahl, 26, bookkeeper at a steel mill. Delivered May 2, 1943. Boy, 8 pounds 9 ounces. Died from congenital heart defect. She'd been working double shifts since her husband shipped out to the Pacific. Edna Whitmore, 29, librarian at Carnegie Library. Delivered July 14, 1943. Boy, 7 pounds 11 ounces. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 54, underscore, underscore. Her husband was in a POW camp in Germany. Opal Grimes, 24, nurse at a clinic in Lawrenceville. Delivered April 5, 1943. Girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 55, underscore, underscore. She'd gone back to work 3 weeks after delivery because they needed the money. Winifred Lattimore, 33, piano teacher. Delivered January 22, 1943. Boy, 8 pounds 2 ounces. Died from sepsis. Her husband was a Navy pilot stationed in the Pacific. They met November 28, 1943, Sunday afternoon at Estelle's apartment. 8 women crowded into the small room. Birdie laid the composition book on the table and told them everything she knew. The pattern she'd observed, the 43 cases over 2 years, the fact that Dr. Ordway never took babies from wealthy families, only from working-class mothers. The empty caskets, she suspected, that would be found if anyone bothered to look. The women listened in silence. When Birdie finished, Frances Holbrook asked the question they were all thinking. What can we do? Dr. Ordway has connections at the state level. Who's going to believe us? We don't go to people who might be connected to Dr. Ordway, Birdie said. We go to the Westmoreland County District Attorney's office in Greensburg. The DA there is Vernon Haskins. I made inquiries through a friend who works at the courthouse. Haskins isn't from Pittsburgh, transferred from Erie 2 years ago. He has no connections to Dr. Ordway or the hospital. What if he doesn't believe us? Violet Brennan asked. He will. There are 8 of us. We have records, dates, names, and we'll demand exhumations. Hazel Dorsey flinched. Exhumations? You mean dig up the graves? Yes, Birdie said firmly, because I'm almost certain our children's bodies aren't in them. I think the caskets are empty. I think Dr. Ordway has been selling our babies. The room went silent. Estelle was the first to speak. Then we go Monday. All of us together. We take off work, we get on a bus, and we go to Greensburg. And we don't leave until someone listens. One by one, the women nodded. November 29th, 1943, Monday morning. 8 women took the Greyhound bus from Pittsburgh to Greensburg, a journey of about 40 miles through rolling Pennsylvania hills. The day was cold, gray, threatening snow. They wore their best clothes, church dresses, mended stockings, coats with collars turned against the wind. Birdie carried the composition book in her handbag. They arrived at the Westmoreland County Courthouse just after 10. The building was imposing, stone, with columns and wide steps. Inside, they asked for the district attorney's office. A secretary tried to turn them away, quote 66, but Birdie said firmly, quote 67. Something in her voice made the secretary hesitate. She disappeared into a back office. 10 minutes later, they were shown into District Attorney Vernon Haskins's office. Haskins was a man of about 50, tired-looking face, wire-rimmed glasses, thinning hair. His office was cluttered with files and law books. He gestured to chairs. There weren't enough, so some of the women stood. Haskins said. Birdie corrected. Haskins' eyebrows rose. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, put them back on. That's a serious accusation. What evidence? Birdie placed the composition book on his desk and opened it. For the next hour, she and the other women told their stories. Haskins listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. He asked each mother to describe her delivery, the baby's condition, what she'd been told about the death, whether she'd seen the body. None had seen the bodies. When they finished, Haskins leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Quote 72, quote, he said finally. Quote 73, quote. Quote 74, quote. Estelle said quietly. Quote 75, quote. Haskins looked at her, then at each of the other women. Quote 76, he said. Quote 77, he tapped it with one finger. Quote 78, quote 79, Birdie asked. Haskins was quiet for a moment. Dorothy Stahl said, her voice sharp. Haskins nodded slowly. Frances Holbrook asked. Opal Grimes said, quote 87 Haskins asked Birdie. Quote 89, quote 90, quote 91, quote 92, quote 93. Haskins made a note. Quote 94. The women agreed. They left the courthouse and took the bus back to Pittsburgh. On the ride home, nobody spoke much. Each woman was lost in her own thoughts. Birdie stared out the window at bare November fields and wondered if she'd just set something irreversible in motion. There was no going back now. The next 3 weeks were agony. Birdie went to work, changed bedding, assisted deliveries, smiled at new mothers, and said nothing. She watched Dr. Ordway move through the ward with his stooped walk and yellow-stained fingers, and she forced herself to act normal. On November 30th, he took another baby, a girl, born to a woman named Iris Fleming, 25 years old, a dress on Penn Avenue. Birdie wrote it in the composition book that night. Entry number 44. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Dr. Ordway and demand he tell her where the babies went. But she stayed silent. She'd promised the DA. December crawled past. The war news was mixed. Allied advances in Italy, brutal fighting in the Pacific, the air war over Germany intensifying. Pittsburgh's mills ran day and night, producing steel for ships and tanks. The city was prosperous but exhausted, its people working harder than they ever had. On December 17, 1943, Birdie received a telephone call at the boarding house. It was Vernon Haskins. Judge Samuel Ridgway has issued exhumation orders for 12 infant graves at Allegheny Cemetery. The families chosen are those who came to my office. We'll conduct the exhumations tomorrow morning at dawn. I need you there as a witness. Birdie's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She called Estelle from the payphone in the boarding house hallway, then Francis, then the others. __quote _96 __. None of them slept that night. December 18, 1943. The morning was bitter cold, temperature below freezing, frost thick on the ground. A thin layer of snow had fallen overnight. Birdie and the 7 other mothers stood behind wooden police barriers at Allegheny Cemetery's infant section, breath visible in the cold air. Court officials, Greensburg police officers, and a forensic pathologist from Philadelphia, a thin man in a long coat named Dr. Raymond Cutler, stood near the graves. Judge Ridgway, a heavy man in his 60s with a face like carved granite, observed from beside his car. Workers in heavy coats and gloves began digging. The frozen ground resisted. Each excavation took about 40 minutes. The first grave, Frances Holbrook's daughter, supposedly buried June 15, 1943. The marker read, __quote _97 __. The workers reached the casket, a small white box, and lifted it out. Dr. Cutler opened it on site under police supervision, as the court order required. Empty. White satin lining, pristine. No body. Not even a residue. Frances Holbrook screamed and collapsed. Violet Brennan and Estelle caught her, held her up. Second grave, Opal Grimes's daughter, buried April 6, 1943. The workers dug. The casket came up. Dr. Cutler opened it. Empty. Third grave, Winifred Lattimore's son, buried January 23, 1943. Empty. Fourth, Dorothy Stahl's son, buried May 3, 1943. Empty. By noon, all 12 caskets had been exhumed and opened. All 12 were empty. Judge Ridgway stood pale-faced beside his car. Vernon Haskins stood next to him, face grim. Haskins turned to one of the Greensburg police officers. Radio Pittsburgh, have Allegheny County Sheriff's deputies arrest Dr. Clement Ordway and head nurse Mildred Gannon immediately. Charge them with kidnapping, falsifying death certificates, and conspiracy. I want them in custody before they can destroy evidence. The officer ran to the police car. Dr. Clement Ordway was arrested at Allegheny General Hospital at 3 p.m. that afternoon. He was in the middle of an examination when deputies entered the room, informed him he was under arrest, and handcuffed him. Head nurse Mildred Gannon was arrested in her office. Both were taken to the Allegheny County Jail. The story broke in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette the next morning. Hospital chief arrested in baby theft ring. 12 empty coffins found at cemetery. By evening, every newspaper in Pennsylvania carried the story. By the following day, it was national news. The New York Times, the Washington Post, even West Coast papers picked it up. Pittsburgh doctor accused of selling newborns. The trial began February 14, 1944, in the Westmoreland County Courthouse in Greensburg. The prosecution was led by Vernon Haskins himself. Dr. Ordway's defense attorney was a prominent Pittsburgh lawyer named Hugh Riddle, who argued that his client had been operating a private adoption service to help childless couples, that the mothers had all been informed and had consented. But there were no consent forms, no documentation of any kind showing the mothers had agreed to give up their babies. Birdie testified on the second day of the trial. She brought the composition book and Haskins entered it as evidence. She read from it, entry by entry. 44 cases. Names, dates, weights, addresses. The jury listened in absolute silence. The 8 mothers testified. Each told her story. The healthy baby, the sudden, quote, 101, the refusal to show the body, the pressure to agree to immediate burial. Hospital staff testified. Some reluctantly admitted they'd noticed irregularities but had been afraid to speak up. A junior physician, Dr. Lawrence Brenner, testified that he'd once questioned Dr. Ordway about an infant death and had been threatened with dismissal. Funeral home directors testified. 3 different funeral homes had provided caskets for Dr. Ordway's infant deaths. All 3 directors admitted under oath that Dr. Ordway had paid them $50 per casket to provide empty boxes and to list the burials as legitimate. He said the bodies had been cremated for public health reasons, one director testified. He said it was hospital policy. I didn't question it. On March 2, 1944, an FBI agent named Donald Kruger testified. The Bureau had been investigating since December. They'd tracked financial records and found that Dr. Ordway had deposited large sums of cash, $500 at a time, into a bank account in Philadelphia. The deposits correlated with dates in Birdie's composition book. Following leads, FBI agents had located 17 of the stolen babies. All had been sold to wealthy couples in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The buyers had been told the babies were orphans from poor families whose mothers had died in childbirth. The adoptions had been arranged through a lawyer in Newark named Arthur Selig, who'd been arrested and was cooperating with investigators. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On March 8, 1944, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Dr. Clement Ordway was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Head nurse Mildred Gannon received 15 years. The lawyer, Arthur Selig, got 10 years. By summer 1944, federal agents and FBI investigators had located 17 of the 44 babies. Court orders were issued. The adoptive families fought the returns. Some hired expensive lawyers, arguing they'd adopted in good faith, that the children had bonded with them, that returning them would be traumatic. But judges ruled consistently. The adoptions had been obtained through fraud and kidnapping. The children had been stolen. They must be returned to their biological mothers. Estelle Kowalski's son, born October 15, 1943, stolen the same day, was found with a banker's family in Newark. The family had named him David. He was 10 months old when federal agents arrived at their suburban home with the court order. The adoptive mother wept and begged. The adoptive father threatened lawsuits. But the agents took the boy and brought him back to Pittsburgh. Estelle held her son for the first time on a hot August afternoon in 1944 in a social services office downtown. The boy cried at first. He didn't know her, knew only the people who'd been raising him. But Estelle held him and rocked him and sang to him in Polish, the lullabies her own mother had sung, and gradually he quieted. She named him Andrew Kowalski, after her father, who died in the mines outside Scranton when Estelle was 12. The other 16 babies came home too. Frances Holbrook got her daughter back. The girl was 13 months old, had been living with a textile executive's family in Patterson. Violet Brennan's son was returned from a family in Hartford. Dorothy Stahl's boy from a family in Albany. One by one, the stolen children came home. But 27 children were never found. The FBI investigation eventually went cold. Some records had been destroyed. Some buyers had moved abroad. One baby had allegedly been taken to Argentina, another to Portugal. The trail vanished. The war effort intensified, and federal resources shifted to military priorities. By 1945, the search had essentially stopped. Birdie stayed at Allegheny General through the end of the war. New hospital administration was brought in. The maternity ward was restructured. New protocols were implemented. Multiple physicians had to sign off on infant deaths. Bodies had to be shown to parents. Independent pathologists had to confirm causes of death. But Birdie couldn't keep working there. The corridors held too many ghosts. In September 1945, after Japan's surrender, she transferred to a veterans hospital in Oakland, working with wounded soldiers returning from Europe and the Pacific. It was hard work. So many boys missing limbs, blinded, shell-shocked. But it felt clean, honest. Nobody was stealing anything. In 1947, Birdie married a wounded Marine named Victor Pell. She'd met him at the Veterans Hospital. He was a patient, recovering from the amputation of his left leg below the knee. He'd lost it at Guadalcanal in 1943. After discharge, he got a job as a tool and die maker at a factory that was transitioning from artillery shells back to peacetime manufacturing. They bought a small house in Bloomfield, a neighborhood of narrow streets and row houses. No children. Birdie never wanted them after what she'd seen. Victor understood. He had his own demons from the war. They understood each other's silences. Estelle Kowalski raised Andrew alone. The boy's father had been a soldier named Stefan Lazowski, who'd shipped out to North Africa in December 1942 before learning about the pregnancy. He'd been killed at Kasserine Pass in February 1943. Estelle never remarried. She worked as a typist at a law firm downtown, eventually becoming the office manager. Andrew grew up quiet, serious, good at school. He loved books, history, detective stories. Birdie stayed in touch with Estelle over the years. Occasional visits, Christmas cards. Andrew called Birdie __quote _105 __, even though they weren't related by blood. To him, she was the woman who'd saved his life, who'd brought him back to his mother. In 1961, Estelle wrote to Birdie, "Andrew has been accepted to Penn State. He wants to study criminology. He says he wants to help people who've been wronged. I think it's because of what happened to us." Andrew graduated in 1965, joined the Pennsylvania State Police, became a detective. He was good at his work, patient, methodical, unwilling to let cases go unsolved. In 1970, he married a schoolteacher named Lucinda Hayes. They had 2 children, Christine, born 1980, and Vincent, born 1983. Estelle died in 1979 from a stroke. She was 64 years old. Andrew called Birdie with the news. Birdie attended the funeral with Victor. She was 60 years old then. Victor was 63. They stood in Holy Trinity Cemetery and watched Estelle's casket lowered into the ground. And Birdie thought about that day in November 1943, when 8 women had walked into a district attorney's office in Greensburg and demanded justice. "She never forgot what you did," Andrew said to Birdie after the service. They stood by Birdie's car, a rusty '71 Chevy Nova with a dent in the passenger door. "I didn't do it alone," Birdie said. "You started it. You kept the records. Without you, none of those children would have been found." Birdie shook her head. "Your mother was the brave one. She could have slammed the door in my face. Instead, she believed me." Andrew nodded. He was 36 years old then, tall like his biological father. Estelle had shown him a photograph once, with his mother's dark eyes and serious expression. "Quote, quote," he said. "Quote, quote, 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 quote." Birdie hesitated. She'd kept the book all these years, stored in a box in her closet. Sometimes she took it out and read the entries, names and dates of children she'd never met. 17 had been returned. 27 had not. Quote, 116, quote, she asked. Quote, 117, quote, Andrew said quietly. Quote, 118, quote. Birdie looked at him, young, determined, honest face. Quote, 119, quote, she said. quote, 120, quote, 121, quote, 122, quote. Andrew was quiet for a moment. Quote, 123, quote, he said. Quote, 124, quote. Birdie thought of all the mothers who'd never gotten their children back. Rita Gorman, Constance Hartwell, Pauline Kester. Women who'd gone to their graves not knowing where their babies were. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 125, underscore, underscore, she said. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 126, underscore, underscore. Andrew came that Sunday afternoon. Birdie made coffee and they sat at her kitchen table, the same table she and Victor had bought in 1947 when they'd moved into the house. She placed the composition book between them, its marbled cover worn and faded. Andrew opened it carefully, as if it were something sacred. He read the first entry. November 23rd, 1941. Room 12. Boy. Weight 8 pounds 6 ounces. Mother, Pauline Kester, age 22, address 512 North Negley Avenue. Ordway removed child at 3:10 p.m. Said consultation with head nurse Gannon required. Baby did not return. He read every entry, all 44 of them. The last one, written in November 1943, was November 30th, Room 8, Girl, weight 7 pounds 2 ounces. Mother, Iris Fleming, age 25, address 2234 Penn Avenue, Apartment 7. Ordway removed child at 11:20 a.m. Said consultation with head nurse Gannon required. Baby did not return. When he finished reading, Andrew closed the book and looked at Birdie. I'll find them, he said, however long it takes. Andrew worked the case in his spare time over the next 2 decades. The original FBI files were declassified in the 1970s under the Freedom of Information Act. Andrew obtained them through formal requests. He cross-referenced them with Birdie's composition book, creating a master database of all 44 cases. He tracked down adoption attorneys who'd worked in New York and New Jersey in the 1940s. Some were dead. Some refused to talk. A few, elderly and conscience-stricken, provided information. The work was slow. Andrew had his regular caseload with the state police, plus a family to raise. But he couldn't let go of those 27 names. In 1987, he got his first break. A woman named Helen Marchetti, living in Paterson, New Jersey, contacted a genealogy service trying to find information about her birth parents. The service found irregularities in her adoption records. The adoption had been finalized in 1943, but there was no record of her birth mother's death, which the adoption papers claimed had occurred during childbirth. The genealogy service contacted Andrew after finding his name in connection with the Ordway case. Andrew interviewed Helen Marchetti. Born in 1943, adopted as an infant by a textile factory owner and his wife. Helen was 44 years old, worked as a bank manager, had 3 grown children. Her adoptive parents had died in the 1970s, never telling her anything unusual about her adoption. Andrew cross-referenced her birth date with Birdie's composition book. It matched. May 2nd, 1943. Mother, Dorothy Stahl, bookkeeper at a steel mill. Dorothy had died in 1981 from cancer, but Andrew contacted her younger sister, Lillian Stahl, who still lived in Pittsburgh. Blood testing confirmed the match. Helen Marchetti was Dorothy Stahl's daughter. Andrew facilitated a meeting between Helen and her biological aunt. It was complicated, emotional. Helen was angry at Dr. Ordway, angry at the system that had failed, angry that her adoptive parents had never told her the truth. But gradually, with counseling, she made peace with it. She learned about Dorothy, about the life her biological mother had lived, about the brother and sister she'd never known. In 1993, Andrew found another, a man named Robert Caldwell, 51 years old, living in Philadelphia. Robert had been adopted in 1942 by a shipping company executive and his wife. The executive had died in 1989, and while settling the estate, Robert had found old letters that mentioned underscore underscore quote underscore 131 underscore underscore. Andrew investigated. The date matched, August 8th, 1943. Mother, Violet Brennan, clerk at Kaufman's department store. Violet was still alive, 73 years old, living in a nursing home in McKeesport. Andrew arranged a meeting. Violet and Robert sat in the nursing home visiting room, strangers bound by blood and tragedy. Violet cried. Robert didn't know how to feel. He'd loved his adoptive parents, had a good life. Learning he'd been kidnapped was like discovering his entire history was built on a lie. But over time, they built a relationship. Violet told him about his father, who'd been killed in Italy. Told him about the day he was born, how she'd heard him cry, how they'd taken him away. Robert listened and tried to understand. By 2000, Andrew had located 18 of the original 44 children. 9 biological mothers were still alive to meet them. The reunions were complicated, painful, sometimes joyful, often bittersweet. Not all the found children wanted relationships with their biological families. Some felt it was too late, that the past should stay buried. Others embraced the connections. Andrew documented everything. He kept meticulous files, worked with family court judges to establish legal parentage and correct birth records where the found individuals wanted that. Birdie watched it all from the sidelines. Victor died in 1998 from heart failure. She was 79, living alone in the Bloomfield house, arthritis making it hard to open jars, cataracts clouding her vision. Andrew visited regularly, brought groceries, fixed things around the house, told her about the cases. I found another one, he'd say, and Birdie would listen. Sometimes she'd cry. Sometimes she'd just nod and say, underscore underscore quote underscore 133 underscore underscore. In 2008, Andrew's daughter Christine graduated from law school at the University of Pittsburgh. She was 28 years old, had worked her way through school while raising a young son as a single mother. She joined the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, specializing in victims' rights and family services. Andrew's son Vincent became a social worker, focusing on adoption trauma and family reunification. He was 25, working at a nonprofit that helped adoptees search for biological families. The family had turned pain into purpose, generation by generation. In 2015, Andrew called Birdie. She was 96 years old then, living in an assisted care facility in Shadyside. Her mind was still sharp, but her body was failing. She couldn't walk without assistance, had trouble hearing, but she remembered everything. Aunt Birdie, Andrew said over the phone, I found the last one. Birdie's hands trembled. Quote, 136. Quote, 137. Quote, 138. Quote, 139. Quote, 140. Quote, 141. Birdie closed her eyes. Tears ran down her wrinkled cheeks. She whispered. Andrew said. Birdie couldn't speak. 74 years since that first entry in 1941. 74 years of waiting, wondering, hoping. Birdie? Andrew's voice on the phone. She managed. Birdie died 3 months later, in August 2015, peacefully in her sleep. She was 96 years old. Her funeral was held at a Lutheran church in Bloomfield. Andrew organized it. More than 100 people came, children from the composition book, now elderly themselves, their own children and grandchildren, social workers, attorneys, journalists who'd covered the reunions over the years. At the service, Andrew stood at the pulpit and held up the composition book, its marbled cover faded to gray, pages yellowed and brittle. This belonged to a nurse named Birdie Calloway, he said. She was 24 years old when she started writing in it. She had no power, no authority, no reason to think anyone would believe her. But she wrote down names and dates because she couldn't not write them down. Because some things matter too much to forget. because she understood that history isn't made by powerful people. It's made by ordinary people who refuse to look away. He paused, looking out at the faces in the pews. 44 children were stolen between 1941 and 1943. All 44 have been found. Not because of lawyers or police or judges, though they helped, but because a nurse in a Pittsburgh hospital kept a composition book and had the courage to show it to a mother who'd lost her baby. Everything that came after, all the reunions, all the healing, all the justice, started with that single act of witness. He placed the composition book on the casket beside a spray of white roses. Birdie once told me she didn't know if the truth always fixes things. Maybe it doesn't. But without truth, nothing can be fixed at all. So we honor her today not just for what she did, but for what she taught us. That documentation matters. That witnesses matter. That one person with a pen and the courage to write can change everything. Later, at Holy Trinity Cemetery, as Birdie was laid to rest beside Victor, Andrew stood with his children Christine and Vincent, his grandchildren, and looked at the gathering of people whose lives had been touched by what had started in a hospital corridor in 1941. Christine put her arm around her father. "She'd be proud of you, Dad." Andrew shook his head. "I just finished what she started." "No," Christine said. "You did more than that. You proved she was right. You proved that what she witnessed mattered." Vincent, standing on Andrew's other side, said quietly, __quote _161 __. Andrew had wondered. Dr. Ordway had died in federal prison in 1958, 14 years into his sentence, from a heart attack. Head nurse Gannon had been released in 1956 after serving 12 years, relocated to Ohio, died in 1962. Neither had expressed remorse. Neither had provided information about where the children had been sent. Andrew said. Christine said. They stood in silence as the gravediggers filled in Birdie's grave. The sun was setting over Pittsburgh, long shadows across the headstones. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Andrew thought about the composition book, now safely stored in the Pennsylvania State Archives. It had been preserved, cataloged, digitized. Future generations would be able to read those entries and understand what had happened in Pittsburgh between 1941 and 1943. How 44 children were stolen and 44 children were found. As they walked back to the cars, Vincent said, "I've been thinking about writing a book. About Grandma Estelle and Birdie and all of it." "You should," Andrew said. "It's a story worth telling. What would you want people to take from it?" Andrew stopped, looked back at Birdie's grave, at the fresh dirt and the flowers. He said, "They drove home through Pittsburgh streets as evening fell. Past Allegheny General Hospital, still standing, still operating, though with entirely different management and staff now. Past the courthouse in Greensburg where the trial had been held. Past the row house on Brereton Street where Estelle had raised Andrew alone, working 2 jobs, never remarrying, pouring everything into her son. That night, Andrew sat in his study and opened the composition book one final time before returning it to the archives. He turned to the last page, where Birdie had written her final entry in November 1943. __quote _171 __. Below it, in Andrew's handwriting, added in 2015, found, Margaret Fleming, born November 30th, 1943. Reunited with half-sister Gloria Fleming Warren, June 2015. Case closed. All 44 children accounted for. All 44 stories completed. Andrew closed the book carefully and sat in the quiet of his study, thinking about his mother, about Birdie, about all the women who'd walked into a district attorney's office in 1943 and demanded to be heard. They'd been heard, and 74 years later, every single child had come home in one way or another, if not to their biological mothers, then at least to the truth of who they were and where they'd come from. It wasn't perfect justice. It couldn't undo the years of separation, the pain, the lies, the lives built on false foundations. But it was something. And sometimes, Andrew thought, something is enough. Sometimes bearing witness, keeping records, refusing to forget. Sometimes that's not just something. It's everything. The next morning, he delivered the composition book to the Pennsylvania State Archives. A curator named Ellen Morrison received it with white-gloved hands, placed it in an acid-free storage box. "This will be preserved in perpetuity," she said. "Available for researchers, historians, anyone who wants to understand what happened." "Good," Andrew said. "That's what Birdie would have wanted." He walked out of the archives building into bright September sunlight. Pittsburgh spread out around him, the city where it had all happened, where 44 babies had been stolen and 44 children had been found, where a nurse named Birdie Calloway had picked up a pen in 1941 and changed the course of dozens of lives. Andrew drove home. His wife Lucinda was in the garden pruning roses. His grandchildren, Christine's boy, now 15, and Vincent's twin girls, 12, were playing in the yard. He stood on the porch and watched them, thinking about legacy. What we pass down, what we refuse to let die. Birdie Calloway had passed down a composition book and a lesson. That ordinary people who witness extraordinary wrongs have a duty to document, to speak, to act. Estelle Kowalski had passed down determination, the refusal to accept what powerful people declared to be true. Andrew hoped he was passing down persistence, the willingness to work a case for 40 years, to never give up on finding what was lost. And his children, Christine and Vincent, were passing down purpose, turning old pain into new service. That night, the family gathered for dinner. Christine brought her son. Vincent brought his daughters. Lucinda made pot roast, the house filled with the smell of cooking meat and vegetables. After dinner, Vincent said, "Dad, I started working on that book, about Grandma and Birdie." "Yeah?" Andrew said. "I wanted to ask you something. The dedication. I was thinking of dedicating it to all the mothers who never got their children back. The ones from those 27 cases that took decades to solve. Is that right?" Andrew thought about it. "Dedicated to Birdie," he said. "She's the one who made everything possible. Without her, none of those children would have been found. Not one." Vincent nodded. "Okay, but I want to include something in the acknowledgments. About you. About how you spent 40 years finishing what she started." "Just tell the truth," Andrew said. "That's all Birdie ever asked for. The truth. Written down. Preserved." The book was published in 2018, 3 years after Birdie's death. Vincent titled it __quote_ 185 ___. It became a regional bestseller, was reviewed in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, was adopted by several universities for courses on medical ethics and social justice. A documentary filmmaker from New York contacted Vincent about adapting it. The documentary aired on PBS in 2020, featuring interviews with some of the found children, now in their 70s and 80s, and their families. Margaret Fleming, the last child found, appeared in the documentary. She was 76 then, articulate, composed. She spoke about learning the truth at age 71, about meeting her half-sister Gloria, about processing the knowledge that her entire origin story had been a lie. __quote_ 186 __, she said on camera. __quote_ 187 __. Andrew watched the documentary with Lucinda in their living room. He was 76, retired from the state police for over a decade, still sharp but slowing down. When Margaret Fleming's interview finished, Lucinda took Andrew's hand. Quote, 188, quote, she said. Quote, 189, quote, 190, quote. Andrew thought about that. 40 years of searching, thousands of hours cross-referencing records, making phone calls, tracking leads that went nowhere, starting over when trails went cold. But he'd never stopped, never quit. because Birdie hadn't quit. When it would have been easier to stay silent, to keep her head down, to let Dr. Ordway keep stealing babies, she'd written their names in a composition book and refused to forget. In 2024, Andrew turned 80. His health was failing, heart problems, diabetes, the accumulated wear of 8 decades. Christine and Vincent threw him a birthday party at a restaurant in Pittsburgh. Family, friends, colleagues from the state police, some of the people he'd helped reunite with their biological families over the years. During the party, a woman approached him. She was in her 80s, moved slowly with a cane. Andrew didn't recognize her at first. "Detective Kowalski?" she said. "I don't know if you remember me. Helen Marchetti. You found me in 1987. Andrew remembered, the first of the 27 he'd found. Andrew felt his eyes water. Helen said. After she walked away, Vincent leaned over and said, quote, 199, quote, Andrew said. Quote, 200, quote, 201, quote, Vincent said. Andrew smiled. Quote, 202, quote. 2 months later, Andrew had a massive heart attack. He survived, but barely. The doctors said his heart was severely damaged. He might have a year, maybe 2. He went home from the hospital in December 2024. Christine and Vincent took turns staying with him and Lucinda, making sure he was comfortable, helping with medications. One evening in January 2025, Andrew asked Vincent to bring him something from the attic. Vincent asked. Vincent brought it. Andrew opened it on his lap as he sat in his recliner, oxygen tubes in his nose. Inside were copies of everything. All the FBI reports, all the court documents, all his own handwritten notes from 40 years of investigation. And at the bottom, a photocopy of Birdie's composition book. The original was in the archives, but Andrew had made copies before donating it. He paged through the photocopy slowly. I want you to promise me something, he said to Vincent. Anything. If any more of these children turn up, through DNA databases or whatever new technology comes, I want you to contact them. Tell them the truth. Help them connect with any biological family that's still alive. Don't let it end just because I'm gone. I promise, Vincent said. And keep telling the story. Keep Birdie's name alive. She deserves that. I will. Andrew died in March 2025, with Lucinda holding one hand and Christine holding the other. He was 81 years old. His funeral was held at the same Lutheran church in Bloomfield where Birdie's had been. The church was packed. Christine gave the eulogy. Quote, 211, quote, she said. Quote, 212, quote. She paused, looking out of the crowded pews. Quote, 213, quote. After the funeral, after Andrew was buried beside his mother Estelle in Holy Trinity Cemetery, the family gathered at Christine's house. Vincent's daughters, now 21, about to graduate from college, asked their father about the case. One of them asked. Vincent said. Vincent looked at his daughters, bright, earnest, carrying forward a legacy they'd inherited from a great-grandmother they'd never met, and a woman named Birdie Calloway who died before they were born. Yes, he said, you can help. And so the work continued. In 2026, a woman named Patricia Donovan, age 83, living in Miami, submitted her DNA to an ancestry website. The database flagged a match to a woman in Pittsburgh named Evelyn Hartwell, age 75. Vincent got the alert. He'd set up monitoring on all the names from Birdie's composition book. He investigated. Patricia Donovan had been adopted in 1943 by a doctor and his wife in Connecticut. Evelyn Hartwell was the granddaughter of Constance Hartwell, one of the mothers from the original case. Constance had died in 1998, but her daughter, Constance's second child, born in 1947, was still alive. DNA testing confirmed it. Patricia Donovan was Constance Hartwell's first daughter, born December 14, 1941, stolen the same day. Vincent contacted Patricia, explained everything, offered to facilitate contact with her biological family. Patricia was shocked, angry, grieving. The people who'd raised her had been good parents. She'd loved them. Learning at 83 that her entire origin story was a lie felt like betrayal, but after months of processing, counseling, and conversation, she agreed to meet Evelyn. They met in Pittsburgh in summer 2026. Two elderly women, strangers bound by blood and history. Evelyn brought photos of Constance, told Patricia about her biological mother's life. Patricia cried. She'd lost the chance to know Constance. Her birth mother had been dead for 28 years. But she gained an aunt, cousins, a whole branch of family she'd never known existed. Vincent documented everything, just as his father had. He kept meticulous files. He updated the composition book's record, now digitized, now part of the permanent archive, but still adding entries. Found: Patricia Donovan, born December 14, 1941. Reunited with biological family, August 2026. Case closed. 45 children accounted for. 45 stories completed. Wait, 45? Vincent checked the records. There had only been 44 entries in Birdie's book. But then he found it. A note in his father's handwriting from 1987. Possible 45th case, December 1941. Mother, Sarah Vickers. Infant girl. No grave found. FBI investigated but couldn't confirm connection to Ordway. Case remained open. Vincent investigated. Sarah Vickers had died in 1975, but her sister was still alive, Mildred Vickers, 98 years old, in a nursing home in Erie. Vincent drove to Erie. He interviewed Mildred. Yes, she remembered. Her sister Sarah had given birth in December 1941 at Allegheny General. The baby had died. That's what they'd been told. But Sarah had never believed it, had gone to her grave insisting the baby had been stolen. Vincent cross-referenced dates, hospital records, everything he could find. The case fit the pattern. December 1941, same hospital, same circumstances. Using DNA databases, he found a match. A woman named Linda Morrison, 84, living in Seattle. Linda Morrison had been adopted in 1942 by a lawyer and his wife. They'd told her she was the child of a woman who died in childbirth in Pennsylvania. Vincent contacted her, explained, offered DNA testing. Linda agreed. The DNA matched. She was Sarah Vickers' daughter. Vincent facilitated a meeting between Linda and Mildred. Mildred wept. Underscore, quote, underscore 225, underscore, she kept saying. Underscore, quote, underscore 226, underscore. In 2027, Vincent published an updated edition of his book, including the discoveries made after his father's death. The new edition was titled The Composition Book: How One Nurse Exposed a Baby Theft Ring, and How Her Legacy Continues. The book ended with this passage. As of 2027, 45 children stolen by Dr. Clement Ordway between 1941 and 1943 have been identified and their stories completed. Some reunited with biological families in life. Others found only after their birth parents had died, but still gained knowledge of their true origins. All because a nurse named Birdie Calloway kept a composition book and refused to let them be forgotten. This is not a story about one person being a hero. It's a story about what becomes possible when ordinary people refuse to look away from injustice. When they document, when they speak up, when they demand accountability. And 74 years later, 45 stolen children had been found. Vincent's book was adopted by more universities, was featured in a second PBS documentary, inspired a generation of nurses, social workers, and law enforcement officers. And somewhere, in the Pennsylvania State Archives, a composition book with a marbled black and white cover sits in an acid-free box, its pages preserved for future generations. 45 entries, 45 names, 45 children who were stolen, but not forgotten. All because one nurse picked up a pen and decided that some things matter too much to let them disappear.